CAP 2030, why are we doing this and what's our vision for it? So first of all, why are we doing it? It's really a direct response to the climate emergency declaration that UBC passed in December 2019, so about a year and a half ago. And one of the things it stipulates is that we be even more aggressive in doing what we can to reduce our own emission and really address this crisis with the urgency that it requires. In terms of the vision for it that we have a vision statement here. I'm not going to read that out, but it's really two different things that we are setting out to do. And one is to set UBC up as a model university and model path for university and community aggressive action on climate and getting on a pathway towards decarbonization. And the second one is that we want to achieve and even exceed the Paris 1.5 Celsius target. So that's the why and what we're hoping to do. In terms of objectives and process, so I'm just trying to zoom pops in my head in the space here. In terms of objectives and process, before I dive into that, I just want to situate the CAP process in terms of the broader climate emergency response. And CAP really is just a subset of the broader UBC climate emergency response, which includes things like aligning our academic research to support climate action, divestments, climate justice, taking issue on climate justice issues. The CAP process really is doing our part to reduce the emissions that we can control. So that's a part of it that supports it. In terms of objectives, we have 3 different objectives, and they are setting new interim targets between the current 2020 and 2050 targets. So 2020 has passed, and our next climate target is not till 2050, which is almost 30 years, and we feel that we need something in the interim to hold ourselves accountable towards and aim towards. And given the name CAP 2030, that's assumed to be a 2030 target. The second objectives is accelerating the decarbonization of campus forward from the current 2050 target date. So we have a net zero target by 2050. We want to move that forward. And the third one is expanding the scope of the climate action plan to areas of influence beyond UBC's direct operations. And these include indirect emissions such as commuting, air travel, and food. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. In terms of process, we set up 8 different technical working groups over last summer, and the team worked together really hard to identify recommendations. And they were given terms of reference that asked for 2 main things. And one is to identify recommendations that materially increase ambition in the issue area. And the second one is that they assess recommendations through a climate justice lens to reflect feedback that we heard in the climate engagement process. So the team worked really hard to come up with the recommendations. We put that together into a draft report and presented that to board this past February. And essentially we got the green light that we're on the right path. So we're keeping going. Right now we're hoping to collect community feedback, and we'll use that to refine the plan further and then have board adoption later this year. In terms of CAP 2030 and what we're doing, what we're hoping to do with it, it's really influenced by some internal and external factors, I think, that are worth noting, especially because I think for this is maybe for the first time a really good news story. And I call it's the first CAP process with a strong tailwind. So the internal factors, like UBC is building on quite a strong foundation on this topic. So UBC has taken climate change seriously for a long time. We've gone through several CAP processes previously. Once our new biomass facility comes online later this spring, we'll be on track to reduce emissions by around 60%. So I think pretty impressive achievements, and we're actually ranked #1 university for climate action globally by Times Higher Education. So we have a really quite a strong foundation to build on. The second is that for the first time, we really have increasing provincial and federal policy support. We've had some provincial support with the carbon tax, but there was still a relatively low level. But the new provincial Clean BC strategy, and especially the new federal climate plan, are really a step change in policy ambition that really supports strong action by the university, but it's also a really good news story for climate action across the country. We also have accelerating innovation in clean tech. In general, clean tech innovation has outperformed expectations in terms of both performance and cost reduction. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is that we have increasing UBC community support for strong action, and the Climate Emergency Declaration is really a clear sign of priorities and a mandate for taking strong action. And really the alignment of these internal external factors are really allowing us to be quite bold and pushing forward towards the decarbonization pathway for 2030. A little bit of definitions before we get to help inform the conversation. So you can see my mouse hopefully. So we have one scope of emission we call campus operations on the left here. So I'm looking at two different screens here. But those are the emissions from our buildings, for example, our campus energy facilities, more fleet vehicles. These are the things that we have addressed previously in CAP processes. It's what we have direct control over and what we, for example, required to offset under provincial regulation. So we keep pushing on this topic. But for the first time, as mentioned, we're extending the area to extended impact indirect emissions. And these include emissions from commuting to and from campus, for example, or upstream emissions from food consumed on campus, or air travel emissions to fly to conferences for UBC research. So that's the first time we're addressing these. I think it's really exciting because while on the one hand, UBC doesn't have direct control over extended impact, it's much more the control of the actual UBC community to influence this. So while the community doesn't have a lot of influence, for example, on what kind of heating equipment goes into a building, the community has a huge amount of influence on how we reduce commuting emissions or food emissions or even air travel emissions through their own individual choices. So much more empowering. The graph here on the left just shows similar information, just puts the GHG opportunity in context. And for campus operations, it's around 40,000 tons of CO2 per year. And extended emissions is around 2 to 3 times as big. So it's not only empowering to the community to take action, but it's also a really large source of emissions. So in terms of where do we think we can get to? So we have a draft target. We don't have a specific draft target. We have a range still, but we're still refining it. But this graph shows the draft target range for campus operations emissions. And you can see our emissions are down from 2007, around over 60,000 tons. We'll be on track to be around 60% below once the biomass facility comes online this year. So we met our 2015 target. We'll be close to, but not quite achieve our 2020 target. We're already well exceeding the Paris 2030 1.5 C target, which is understood to be a 45% reduction by 2030. So we're already exceeding that. And we identified a few key buckets of action that can get us significantly further down. And one is building scale solutions in green here. They can get us another 10 to 15% reduction. The second one is district energy system decarbonization. We have a big district energy system at UBC, so decarbonization can get us another 10 to 15% reduction. And then the last, which together would get us around 85 to 90% reduction, if we can capitalize on all of those, which is going to be really challenging. And beyond that, to get to 100%, for example, we would require some sort of off-campus or carbon capture solution like direct air capture for 100% verifiable offset. So we are still assessing these. We're studying these issues and how far we think we can get. But we have a range currently for 75 to 100%. We want to keep the 100% in there because technology innovation is happening rapidly. We didn't want to rule that out, but we'll be refining that toward later this year. And in this range, we'll be around 2 decades ahead of where leading jurisdictions want to achieve those levels of those kinds of targets. For extended emissions, it's a little different because we haven't taken much action on this in the past. It's not all our control, of course. Emissions have a trend line of increasing. And the working groups have identified that ambitious but achievable targets are 45 to 50% reduction for each area to align ourselves with the 1.5 C Paris target. So in short, for campus operations, direct emissions, we're looking to materially exceed the Paris target, and for extended impact, we're looking to meet the Paris 1.5 C target. So how do we achieve this? I think these are quite ambitious goals, especially given the lack of time. And it becomes increasingly clear that no single actor can do this by themselves. It becomes increasingly a whole university initiative, and success really depends on strong collective action across the university. That means taking advantage of UBC expertise and know-how, and I've been impressed by how much there is of this here on campus. Aligning and advancing research objectives whenever possible, such as campus as a living lab philosophy and projects. Also leveraging strategic investments in infrastructure upgrades. So when we, for example, do an upgrade to a building for seismic upgrades, for example, let's use that intervention to also advance our climate priorities. And lastly is leveraging the passion of the UBC community. I think it's critical, especially for extended impacts. And I guess the key message is really that it requires us all to take ownership and responsibility to do our part and advance and do what we can to advance this strategic mission for the university. So that's the high level overview. Now I want to just give you a bit of a flavor of what are some of the key actions. And there's a lot here. I won't have time to get through all the actions. But to give you an idea of some of the key ones. And I want to start with the academic district energy system because it's by far our biggest source of emissions, well over half. And we have a draft target that by 2030, 100% of the energy used by UBC Vancouver district energy system will be from low carbon sources. And we're currently studying these issues in detail. They're quite complex. We'll definitely be quite at the leading edge of these technology deployments. So careful studies required. The infrastructure project, so planning is required as well. So we're looking for an implementation timeline to start somewhere around 2025 with new projects and hopefully meet the goal of 100% by 2030. For new and existing buildings, for new buildings, we have a draft target of new buildings and renewals to target zero operational emissions. For existing buildings, it's a bit more complicated, and we're still doing some analysis to define it exactly. But some of the key actions include eliminating all fossil fuel equipment installation in new and existing buildings unless sufficient amount of renewable natural gas can be secured. That includes retrofits of equipment that needs to be replaced in existing buildings. We're also looking to develop a building decarbonization plan that integrates with maintenance and renewal programs to really increase ambition and accelerate climate action on that front. On two other ones for campus operations, on the fleet side, we have a target that UBC will procure only new vehicles that have zero emission, wherever feasible solutions exist. So the action is establishing a zero emission vehicle first procurement policy. And this is one area where the working group really felt that with technology innovation, we can really be more aggressive on the timeline than we might have thought even just a few years ago. So that's essentially upon plan adoption, we aim to procure zero emission vehicles whenever possible. We're also looking to implement an internal carbon price, a shadow price it's called, that goes beyond and above federal and provincial policies. And the goal really is to better align with UBC's financial decision-making explicitly to our climate goals by accounting for the damages of greenhouse gases in a predictable and consistent manner. And we've done a few pilot projects on this, and we're currently finalizing the starting price level and the price schedule escalation. Moving on to extended impacts and extended emissions. And as a reminder, we're looking to reduce emissions to 45% to meet the Paris targets. And also a reminder, it's not just UBC that can achieve this. It really requires different stakeholders to work together. And that means UBC, the UBC community, all levels of government, transit group for commuting actions, for example, farmers and food providers for food action, and working with other universities for reducing air travel for conferences, for example. But we do believe that UBC has a really critical role in spearheading these efforts. Some key actions for extended impacts. For business air travel, we're looking to develop and implement an air travel emission reduction program that supports and promotes use and uptake of virtual alternatives. And also we're looking to partner with other universities and university climate networks that we're part of to really create more of a systemic change, because it can't just be UBC by itself. We really need to work smartly across the university ecosystem to make these solutions more, more acceptable. For food systems, we're looking to develop a food system climate action strategy that includes a supplier code of conduct and new procurement guidelines. And we have a draft procurement target of 80% climate-friendly food by 2030. We're also looking to implement a climate food labeling project to help inform the consumer on the climate impacts of various food choices. For commuting, by far the biggest, or certainly the biggest of our extended impacts in terms of emissions, we're looking to enable and support remote working, flex days, and e-learning to build on the lessons from COVID. We're also exploring the potential of a sustainable transportation levy to fund new programs, behavior change programs, for example, or infrastructure upgrades, for example, better EV parking. And of course, we continue to pursue the SkyTrain connection to campus by 2030. A few other extended impact areas. I won't mention all of these, but I'll just mention a couple. Embodied carbon in buildings. That's embodied carbon in building materials, for example. This is really quite a new area of research, but quite a big source of emission, it turns out. So we are looking to develop guidelines for assessing and reducing emissions. Also looking to develop a carbon red list of carbon intensive building materials we don't want on our campus and pursue research collaboration. And we're looking, the other one I want to mention, engagement and outreach programs. These are really critical because they support action across the university on the different extended impact areas. And we want to create a more integrated cross-campus communications and engagement management model to be much more effective in reaching the broader UBC community in pursuing these efforts. Shifting gears slightly on resourcing this strategy. This is going to be critical. These are, I believe, quite aggressive actions, and they're not going to come cheaply. If it was all cheap and easy, we wouldn't have to do all this work, especially because a lot of low-hanging fruit has been taken care of, especially for campus operations. But to address this, we're working currently on a comprehensive resourcing strategy to really identify efficiencies, explore external funding opportunities and partnerships with government, utility, businesses, for example, and generally identify innovative resourcing approaches. And two things to mention here. Strategy and decision support, UBC strategy and decision support has been helping us, and we're very grateful for their support on this. And secondly, the goal here really is, this is not a plan for the sake of making a plan. We are fully intentioning to make this a priority and follow through with these recommendations, and resourcing is a key part of it, and we're working actively on that. Okay, just a couple more slides here, perhaps maybe the most important slide of the presentation, because this is a call to action for you to help improve the climate action plan. We have the team develop a survey, and the survey is really focused on better understanding the barriers and opportunities that the UBC community will face in doing and participating in climate action efforts, especially around commuting, food, air travel, for example. The survey takes about 15 minutes to complete, and we're going to consider it very carefully in how we update the climate action plan moving forward, and your input is invaluable. And it's definitely worth doing because it helps improve the plan, but you can also win great prizes. We have 5 prizes for $100 gift cards to an initiative called Support Local BC. Just a couple more slides. Process and next steps in terms of the plan development, so CAP development. Currently, we're studying issues, and we've in detail. We have lots of consulting studies out, quite technical work, and we'll refine recommendations based on that. We're seeking and incorporating community feedback, and we're hoping for board adoption of the plan by November 2021 this year, which will make it official part of UBC strategy. In terms of implementation timeline, at like a 30,000-foot level for these actions, I'd mentioned we're working on a resourcing strategy that will help support implementation throughout the decade of these actions. For campus operations, building scale solutions, we're looking at a timeline of essentially now or upon plan adoption to the end of the decade and beyond. For district energy system decarbonization, bigger capital projects that require more planning. So we're looking at an implementation line of around 2025, start with projects to the end of the decade and beyond. And for extended impacts, it's really development of implementation of programs. It's really starting now or upon the completion of the adoption of the plan and extending to the decade. And before moving on to Q&A, we're often asked by people like, what can we do? How can we help? And there's lots you can do, and they really often align closely with these extended impact areas, which I think is exciting. Things you can do, there are many more, but one is shifting your diet, start moving towards a more plant-based diet, even just occasionally. Embracing sustainable transport, ditch the single occupancy vehicle. That's by far our single largest commuting source of emissions. And also rethink air travel, especially in light of the learnings from COVID. And lastly, there are lots of really great initiatives on campus to get involved with. Too many to list here, but you can visit our website where we list many of them.